For 3 months, she had maintained this silent vigil, documenting the behavior of the most elusive predators in North America, a pack of dire wolves, remnants of a species thought extinct. Her research station, disguised as a weathered hunting blind, sat 30 feet above the forest floor on a natural rocky ledge. Solar panels disguised as fallen logs powered her equipment, while motion sensors and infrared cameras captured every movement in the territory below. The pack had accepted this structure as part of their environment, never suspecting that human eyes watched their every ritual, every hunt, every moment of tenderness with their young. The alpha female, whom Maya had named Artemis, emerged from the den carved into the hillside opposite her position. The wolf's silver-grey coat rippled with muscle as she stretched, her amber eyes scanning the territory with the practiced efficiency of a creature born to rule. At her side, the alpha male, Apollo, appeared, his darker fur marked with scars from countless battles. Together, they commanded respect from every creature in these mountains. Behind them, 3 cubs tumbled from the den's entrance, their playful energy a stark contrast to their parents' dignified bearing. The largest cub, bold and curious, ventured furthest from the den, while his siblings preferred to stay close to their mother's protective shadow. Maya had spent weeks documenting their individual personalities, noting how each responded differently to their parents' teachings about survival in this harsh wilderness. Her notebook filled with observations, hunting patterns, territorial markings, social hierarchies, and the complex communication system the pack employed. Every detail mattered for her research on predator rehabilitation and conservation. The government grant funding her work came with strict conditions: observe but never interfere. These wolves represented a genetic treasure, potentially the key to understanding how apex predators adapted to human encroachment on their territories. As the morning progressed, Maya watched the pack's daily routine unfold. Artemis groomed her cubs with gentle precision, while Apollo surveyed their domain from a prominent rock outcropping. The cubs practiced their hunting stances, pouncing on shadows and wrestling with each other under their parents' watchful eyes. This peaceful domestic scene belied the deadly efficiency these predators possessed when hunting or defending their territory. The radio at her side crackled softly, her daily check-in with the research base. "Station 7, report status," came the voice of Dr. Rodriguez, her supervisor. Maya keyed the microphone quietly. "All normal. Pack showing typical morning behaviors. Weather holding steady." She kept her voice barely above a whisper, though. The den was over 200 yards away. As afternoon approached, subtle changes in the wolves' behavior caught her attention. Artemis and Apollo exchanged a series of low growls and meaningful glances. The alpha pair began moving with purpose, their body language shifting from relaxed to focused. Maya recognized the signs. They were preparing for a major hunt. These expeditions sometimes lasted days, especially when tracking large prey like elk or moose through the mountain passes. The cubs sensed the shift in their parents' mood, becoming more subdued and attentive. Artemis nuzzled each of her offspring. In turn, a farewell ritual Maya had observed before previous hunts. Apollo marked the den's perimeter one final time, reinforcing the scent barriers that warned other predators away from their vulnerable young. With practiced silence, the alpha pair disappeared into the dense undergrowth, leaving their cubs alone in the territory. This was natural behavior. The young were old enough to survive independently for short periods, and the den's location provided excellent natural defenses. Maya settled in for what she knew would be a long period of solitary observation, watching over the cubs while documenting their behavior in their parents' absence. The forest seemed to hold its breath after the alpha pair vanished into the wilderness. Maya adjusted her position on the rocky ledge, knowing from experience that the cubs' behavior would change dramatically without their parents' constant supervision. Her cameras whirred softly as they tracked the young wolves' movements, but she kept her binoculars trained on the den entrance, watching for any signs of distress or danger. For the first few hours, the cubs maintained their usual playful demeanor. The largest, whom Maya had nicknamed Scout for his adventurous nature, ventured to the edge of their parents' scent markers, but didn't cross the invisible boundaries. His sister, Whisper, preferred to stay near the den entrance, her cautious nature keeping her close to familiar safety. The youngest, Ember, fell somewhere between his siblings, curious but not reckless, playful but aware of his limitations. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the cub's behavior began to shift. Scout's explorations became more tentative, and he frequently looked toward the direction his parents had taken. Whisper remained by the den, but lifted her head at every sound, her ears constantly swiveling to catch potential threats. Ember stayed, close to his siblings, apparently sensing their growing unease. Maya documented these behavioral changes meticulously, noting how quickly the cubs adapted to their temporary independence. Yet beneath their surface calm, she could see signs of stress. The way Scout's tail drooped slightly, how Whisper's breathing became more rapid, the manner in which Ember kept glancing at the empty spot where Apollo usually maintained his watch. Wind began to shift as the sun descended behind the mountain peaks, carrying new scents through the valley. Maya's weather instruments detected the approaching storm system her meteorological reports had predicted. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the kind of mountain tempest that could last for days. She secured her equipment and pulled on her rain gear, knowing she would need to maintain her observation post regardless of conditions. The cubs sensed the approaching weather change before Maya's instruments registered it. Their nostrils flared as they tested the air, and their body language became increasingly agitated. Scout let out a soft whine, the first vocalization Maya had heard from any of the cubs since their parents' departure. The sound carried clearly. Across the valley, a plaintive note that seemed to underscore their vulnerability. As the first raindrops began to fall, the cubs huddled closer together near the den entrance. The storm struck with typical mountain fury, sheets of rain driven by howling winds that bent the trees and turned the forest floor into a maze of mud and rushing water. Lightning illuminated the valley in stark, momentary clarity, followed by thunder that echoed off the surrounding peaks. Maya pulled her waterproof hood tight and wiped the condensation from her binoculars. Through the driving rain, she could barely make out the cubs' forms as they pressed against each other for warmth and comfort. The den would provide some shelter, but she knew from previous observations that the cubs preferred to remain outside unless forced to retreat by extreme weather. Hours passed with the storm showing no signs of abating. Maya's concern grew as she watched the cubs' increasingly distressed behavior. Scout attempted to howl several times, calling for his parents, but his voice was still too young to carry far in the wind. Whisper had retreated partially into the den, only her eyes visible. As she watched the storm with obvious fear, Ember, usually the most balanced of the three, began pacing in tight circles, a stress behavior Maya had never observed in the cubs before. Through her night vision scope, Maya noticed something that made her stomach clench with worry. Whisper was limping. During one of her retreats into the den, she had apparently injured her right hind leg. The injury didn't appear severe, but any weakness in the wilderness could prove fatal, especially for a young animal without its parents' protection. Storm raged through the night, and Maya maintained her vigil despite the miserable conditions. She checked her radio repeatedly, hoping for word that the alpha pair had found shelter and would return once the weather cleared. But the storm's intensity made communication impossible. Static filled every frequency as lightning continued to slash across the sky. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken, but new dangers emerged with the pale morning light. Through her binoculars, Maya spotted movement at the edges of Scout's territory, shadows that didn't belong to the familiar wildlife of the region. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the distinctive loping gait of coyotes, drawn by some scent or sound that had penetrated even the storm's fury. The coyotes moved like wraiths through the storm-washed forest, their lean bodies designed for opportunistic survival in the harsh mountain environment. Maya counted at least 4 adults, their yellow eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence, as they tested the air currents for information about the territory they were entering. These weren't the suburban coyotes found near populated areas. These were wild mountain hunters, perfectly adapted to exploit any weakness they encountered. Through her telephoto lens, Maya could see the lead coyote pause at the edge of Apollo's scent markers. The animal's body language showed initial hesitation. The wolf pack's territorial markings still carried enough potency to give pause to most intruders. But as minutes passed without any sign of the alpha pair, the coyote's confidence visibly grew. It crossed the boundary with deliberate steps, and the others followed. The cubs sensed the approaching danger before they could see it. Scout's head shot up, his nostrils flaring as he caught the alien scent on the wind. His hackles rose instinctively, and he let out a low growl that sounded more like a puppy's warning than a genuine threat. Whisper struggled to her feet despite her injured leg, while Ember pressed against his siblings, their puppy instincts telling them to cluster together in the face of danger. Maya's hands tightened on her binoculars as she watched the scene unfold. Her research protocols were crystal clear. Under no circumstances should she interfere with natural predator-prey dynamics. These observations were meant to document authentic wildlife behavior, and any human intervention would compromise the scientific validity of her work. Her funding, her career, and her reputation depended on maintaining strict neutrality. But as she watched the coyotes spread out in a classic hunting formation, her scientific objectivity warred with her human instincts. The cubs were barely old enough to hunt effectively, and with Whisper's injury limiting their mobility, they would be easy prey for the experienced pack hunters. The coyotes moved with the patience of creatures who understood that time was on their side. The lead coyote approached to within 50 yards of the den, close enough that the cubs could see their tormentor clearly. Scout stepped protectively in front of his injured sister, his young body trembling with the effort to appear threatening. His attempts at intimidating growls came out as high-pitched whines that only emphasized his vulnerability. Ember tried to support his brother's display, but his tail remained tucked between his legs, betraying his terror. Maya reached for her radio, her hands shaking as she tried to raise her supervisor. The storm had passed, but atmospheric interference still plagued the radio frequencies. Through bursts of static, she managed to make contact with the research base. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Station 7. I have a situation developing. The cubs are under threat from coyote predation. Parents still absent. Request guidance." The response came through broken and distorted. "Maintain protocol, non-interference, essential for scientific integrity, observe and document only." The words hit Maya like physical blows. She understood the reasoning. Her research was part of a larger study on predator population dynamics and natural selection pressures. Intervention would corrupt the data and potentially invalidate months of careful observation. From a scientific standpoint, the cubs represented data points in a larger ecosystem study, not individual lives deserving protection. But as she watched Whisper struggle to support her own weight while trying to stay close to her brothers, Maya felt her clinical detachment crumbling. These cubs weren't just subjects in her research. They were individuals she had observed since birth. She knew Scout's fearless curiosity, Whisper's gentle intelligence, Ember's thoughtful balance between caution and courage. They had personalities, family bonds, and a future that hung in the balance of the next few minutes. The coyotes began their final approach, their movements coordinated through subtle body language and positioning. They had identified Whisper as the weakest member of the group and adjusted their attack pattern accordingly. Two coyotes would create a distraction, while the others moved to separate the injured cub from her protectors. Scout sensed the strategy and tried to position himself between all the approaching threats and his siblings. His young voice cracked as he attempted a proper howl, calling desperately for parents who were too far away to hear. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, a heartbreaking plea that seemed to emphasize the cub's complete isolation. Maya's scientific training told her to document what was about to happen. Predation was a natural part of ecosystem balance, and the cub's fate would provide valuable data about survival rates and selection pressures. But her human heart recognized something else in Scout's howl, a cry for help that transcended species boundaries, a desperate plea from one living being to another for protection against overwhelming odds. The lead coyote crouched low, preparing for the final charge that would scatter the cubs and allow the pack to isolate their chosen target. Time seemed suspended as Maya faced the most important decision of her career: maintain her scientific objectivity or act on the compassion that made her human. The moment stretched like a taut wire between two impossible choices. Maya's scientific training screamed at her to remain hidden, to let nature take its course regardless of her emotional attachment to the cubs. Her research represented 3 years of funding, countless hours of meticulous documentation, and the potential for breakthrough. Discoveries in predator conservation. Breaking protocol now would destroy everything she had worked toward. But as she watched Scout's small form trembling with determination as he tried to shield his injured sister, something deeper than scientific training rose within her. The fundamental human instinct to protect the vulnerable. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Knowledge without compassion is just clever cruelty, Mija. The lead coyote tensed for its charge. In that crystalline moment of decision, Maya abandoned 3 months of perfect concealment. She burst from her hiding place, crashing through the underbrush, with all the noise her human form could generate. "Hey, get away from them!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the valley with startling authority. The effect was instantaneous and electric. The coyotes froze in confusion, their predatory focus shattered by the unexpected appearance of a human in what they had assumed was empty wilderness. The cubs whirled toward the sound, Scout's ears flattening against his head in bewilderment, while Whisper instinctively tried to retreat despite her injured leg. Maya had no weapon except a small canister of bear spray and her emergency flare gun. She fired the flare high into the air, where it burst in a shower of red sparks and acrid smoke. The brilliant display and sharp crack of ignition sent the coyotes scattering, their opportunistic nature making them unwilling to confront an unknown human threat. But her intervention created a new and equally dangerous situation. The cubs, never having encountered humans at close range, responded with pure instinct. Scout placed himself between Maya and his siblings, his young hackles raised and lips pulled back to reveal milk teeth that would grow into formidable weapons. Whisper whimpered in pain and confusion, torn between fleeing and staying with her brothers. Ember crouched low, ready to bolt at the first sign of aggression. Maya forced herself to move slowly, her years of animal behavior training kicking in. Despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, she crouched low to appear less threatening and avoided direct eye contact, which the cubs would interpret as a challenge. "Easy," she whispered, her voice soft and non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you." From her backpack, she retrieved her first aid kit, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. Whisper's injury was her primary concern. The cub was clearly favoring her right hind leg, and Maya could see swelling around what appeared to be a sprained joint. Without treatment, The injury could worsen or become infected, turning a temporary setback into a death sentence. The cubs watched her with a mixture of fear and curiosity as she prepared a makeshift compress from her emergency supplies. Scout maintained his protective stance, but seemed puzzled by her non-aggressive behavior. His natural curiosity warred with his instinct to protect his pack, creating a tension that kept him alert but not actively hostile. Maya began speaking, softly, maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation that seemed to calm the cubs, despite their inability to understand her words. "Your parents will be back soon," she murmured, soaking gauze in antiseptic solution. "You just need to let me help your sister until they return." Whisper's injury required direct contact, and Maya knew the crucial moment was approaching. If the cubs bolted now, Whisper might not be able to keep up, leaving her vulnerable to the coyotes, who were surely watching from the forest edge. But if Maya moved too quickly or aggressively, she could trigger a panic response that would scatter the cubs in all directions. She extended her hand slowly, palm up, allowing Whisper to catch her scent. The cub's nose twitched as she processed this new information, human but not threatening, foreign but somehow reassuring. After what felt like an eternity, Whisper allowed Maya to gently examine her injured leg. The joint was swollen but not broken, likely sprained when the cub slipped on wet rocks during the storm. Maya carefully wrapped the leg with elastic bandage, securing it firmly, but not so tightly as to restrict circulation. Throughout the process, she maintained her soft, steady stream of reassuring words, though she knew the cubs responded more to her tone than her actual meaning. Scout and Ember gradually relaxed as they observed their sister receiving help rather than harm. Their natural intelligence allowed them to recognize beneficial behavior, even from an unfamiliar species. When Maya finished treating Whisper's injury, all three cubs were watching her with open curiosity rather than fear. But even as she felt a surge of triumph at gaining their trust, Maya knew her actions had created complications that would extend far beyond this moment. She had broken the fundamental rule of wildlife research, compromising the scientific validity of her entire project. More immediately dangerous, she had placed herself in direct contact with apex predators whose parents would return expecting to find their territory exactly as they had left it. The sound of approaching howls in the distance announced that her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Artemis and Apollo were returning from their hunt, and they would scent human presence in their territory long before they saw the evidence of Maya's intervention. The haunting howls echoed through the mountain valley, growing stronger and more urgent with each repetition. Artemis and Apollo were returning, and their vocalizations carried a note of alarm that made Maya's blood run cold. The alpha pair had detected something wrong in their territory, foreign scents, signs of disturbance, and most critically, the absence of their cubs' responding calls. Maya's mind raced through her options, none of them good. She could retreat to her observation post and hope the wolves wouldn't investigate her scent trail, but that would leave the cubs exposed if the coyotes returned. She could attempt to distance herself from the cubs while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary, but any human presence in the territory would be seen as an invasion. Or she could stay and face the consequences of her decision, trusting that her actions in protecting the cubs might somehow communicate her benign intentions. The cubs heard their parents' calls and responded with excited yips and howls, their relief evident in every sound. Scout stood taller, his confidence returning with the knowledge that his powerful parents were near. Whisper tested her bandaged leg gingerly, finding that the support allowed her to put weight on it without severe pain. Ember bounced between his siblings, his natural exuberance reasserting itself now that safety seemed assured, but Maya knew the real test was yet to come. Through her binoculars, She had observed enough pack interactions to understand the complex social dynamics at work. Artemis and Apollo ruled their territory through a combination of intelligence, strength, and unwavering vigilance against threats. Finding a human in close proximity to their vulnerable offspring would trigger every protective instinct they possessed. The forest fell silent as the adult wolves approached, their passage through the undergrowth so stealthy that only their occasional scent marking indicated their presence. Maya positioned herself between the cubs and the direction of their parents' approach, not as a barrier, but as a clear indication that she posed no threat to the young wolves. She kept her body language submissive, avoiding eye contact and making herself appear as non-threatening as possible. Artemis appeared first, materializing from the shadows like a living embodiment of wild intelligence. Her silver coat was matted, with mud and blood from the hunt, and her amber eyes burned with primal intensity as she assessed the unprecedented situation. Behind her, Apollo's darker form emerged, his massive frame radiating controlled power as he positioned himself to flank any potential threat. The reunion between parents and cubs should have been joyful, but the presence of a human transformed it into a moment of electric tension. The cubs rushed toward their parents with obvious relief, but Artemis and Apollo remained focused on Maya, their nostrils flaring as they processed the complex scent information surrounding their den. Maya remained perfectly still, forcing herself to breathe slowly and evenly despite the terror coursing through her system. These were not the semi-domesticated wolves of wildlife preserves. These were apex predators in their prime, fully capable of killing a human if they perceived a threat to their offspring. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew sudden movement would trigger an attack. Artemis approached first, her gait deliberate and controlled. She circled Maya at a distance of about 10 feet, gathering scent information while maintaining perfect positioning for a strike. Apollo mirrored his mate's movements from the opposite side, their coordination speaking to years of hunting together. The cubs watched this inspection with fascination, sensing the gravity of the moment but not understanding its full implications. The female wolf's investigation paused when she reached Whisper. Artemis immediately detected her daughter's injury and the foreign scents associated with medical treatment. Her hackles rose as she processed this information. Her cub had been hurt and touched by the human, but somehow the injury was treated rather than worsened. What happened next would forever change Maya's understanding of interspecies communication. Artemis approached her injured daughter and carefully sniffed the bandaged leg. Her expression shifted from aggressive suspicion to what could only be described as puzzled recognition. The scent evidence told a story: injury, treatment, healing. The human had helped rather than harmed. Apollo's investigation of the surrounding area revealed additional information. The coyote scent trail, the signs of the cub's distress, and the evidence of human intervention painted a clear picture of what had occurred. When he looked at Maya again, his eyes held a different quality, not friendship, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The moment of truth came when Artemis stood directly in front of Maya, close enough that the wolf's breath misted in the cool mountain air. Their eyes met briefly, a violation of pack protocol that should have triggered immediate aggression. Instead, Artemis tilted her head slightly, studying this strange creature who had broken every rule of the wilderness, yet somehow proven herself worthy of trust. Slowly, deliberately, Artemis turned away. It was not dismissal, but acceptance, acknowledgement that the human's presence, while unprecedented, had served the pack's interests. Apollo followed his mate's lead, moving to check on his cubs while keeping Maya in his peripheral vision. The cubs rushed to their parents, their excited chatter providing a soundtrack to the family reunion. Scout pressed against his father's sighed while demonstrating his brave stance during the coyote encounter. Whisper showed off her bandaged leg with obvious pride, and Ember simply reveled in having his complete family together again. As the pack settled into their normal evening routine, Maya slowly backed away toward her observation post. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, forging a connection between human and wolf that defied every protocol of wildlife research. Her career might be ruined, her funding certainly endangered, but as she watched the cubs playing safely under their parents' watchful eyes, she felt a profound sense of rightness about her choice. The cubs had cried for help, and she had answered. In that moment of decision, she had chosen compassion over protocol, protection over career advancement. The silent human watcher had become something more, a guardian who proved that sometimes the most important truths cannot be captured in field notes or scientific papers, but only in the courage to act when innocent lives need protection. Night fell over the mountain wilderness. Maya returned to her post with the knowledge that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the behavior of wild animals, but the moment when understanding transcended species boundaries, creating a bridge between two very different forms of intelligence, united by the universal language of care for the young and vulnerable.